Thank you so much, Kimberly, for an incredible kickoff to this conversation. I am super excited to hear what else our speakers have to offer. And next, we are going to be moving into the conversation on book bans. And according to PEN America, who published a report in September of this year, during the 2021 and 2022 school year, 138 school districts in 32 states banned more than 2,500 books, robbing our youngest Americans the opportunity to learn through literature. And now we are going to hear a story from Sabrina Looney with the AAPF.
My name is Sabrina Looney, and I am a wife and mother of 4, and I live in Wentzville, Missouri. I got wind that there were some books that were being challenged. My son actually happens to be in English AP class, so this would directly affect him. There was too much of a coincidence of books that were targeting LGBTQ authors and that was targeting Black authors. And that was something that struck me because I was raised in a very rural area. And I understood the importance of having books to help me identify some of the things that I experienced within a school system where I didn't feel like I was seen. I talked to my son and I asked him, what did he feel and what did he think? And he said he thought it was wrong. And I asked him, did he think it was wrong enough for him to do something about it? And he said yes. And that was my proud mama moment because I wanted to do something, but I needed him to also be an advocate for himself. And so we contacted the ACLU. I would say to anyone who is going to stand up for something that is wrong in your community, that is wrong in society, that you feel like it's wrong, you have to be prepared to finish the fight. You have to be prepared for whatever comes next. You have to show strength in whatever decision that you make. You have to show tenacity to finish it. It is not for the weak, but when my story is told, I'm confident in the fact that it would be that I stood up when something was wrong.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. The Truth Be Told campaign is a coordinated and strategic response to the legislative backlash banning the teaching of honest and inclusive American history and civics in partnership with activists, advocates, scholars, lawyers, and educators from across the country. Critical race theory is about teaching the honest and inclusive history of America and how injustices from the past create inequality for some people today. It is the best way to combat division and promote unity by equipping our children with the tools they need to thrive in a diverse world. Anti-CRT legislation seeks to chill and silence lessons on race, racism, sexism, and the truth about America's history in public school classrooms. Conservatives have been utilizing buzzwords like divisive concepts, parents' rights, age-appropriate instruction, and curriculum transparency to mask the true nature of their anti-racism legislative campaign. To understand the end goal, consider the recent boast in the New York Times by anti-CRT architect Christopher Rufo, when he declared, "We are right now preparing a strategy of laying siege to the institutions." The institutions here are the public schools, which he believes are waging war against American children and American families. Let's go back to fall of 2020 to answer the question, how did we get here? After viewing an interview with Christopher Rufo on Fox News, former President Trump issued an executive order banning diversity and inclusion training in the federal government. The American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, hosted a workshop in December of 2020 as part of its annual summit to advance model legislation with right-wing actors. The workshop, entitled Against Critical theories onslaught was led by speakers from conservative think tanks. The summit was designed to provide a blueprint to expand Trump's executive order to the red wall, representing the 30 Republican trifectas held in red states. Although President Biden rescinded this order on his first day, the Red Wall campaign was already underway with states introducing and passing anti-CRT legislation. The chilling effects were immediately felt by educators nationwide. Kristen?
It bears noting that most of the ALEC-inspired bills passed initially mirrored the executive order language, focusing on banning ill-defined divisive concepts related to race and sex stereotyping or scapegoating to prevent highly subjective feelings of classroom discomfort, mainly among white children. A closer look at bills introduced in 2022 reveals that legislators are taking a more aggressive approach to attack CRT, being more explicit and transparent about what they seek to silence. Over the past 2 years, we've seen 89 bills specifically target critical race theory by name, while inaccurately defining what it is, and a total of 214 bills restricting teaching of race and sex-related concepts in schools, universities, and employee trainings. Another wave of anti-truth legislation includes bills that would mandate the instruction of highly partisan materials that are favorable to conservatives. This is a clear ploy to indoctrinate students by preventing them from accessing certain content, namely content that illuminates how systemic racism influences law and society, and force-feeding them content that cements a singular view. One key example is Florida's HB 395, an anti-communism bill championed by Governor DeSantis, which ironically mandates the instructions of how citizens suffered the suppression of speech under communist regimes. Mandatory punishment is another trend. These are specific required punishments for individuals or school districts found in violation of the law. One especially egregious example is Oklahoma's SB 1142 that sought to impose a $10,000 fine for school districts whose libraries contain books about gender identity. Finally, there's been an increase in surveillance state provisions, typically billed as parental bills of rights, demanding that teachers post all their lesson plans and readings online for parental view and consent. These are part of a broader trend of parental rights bills that have historically reared their ugly head in moments of racial progress in schools, like after Brown v. Board of Education.
Banning books that offend the sensibilities of concerned parents is an American tradition with a long history, and the coordinated war on books that we're seeing today is only the latest chapter in this story. In the early 1900s, the United Daughters of the Confederacy were banning textbooks they deemed unjust to the South. In the 1930s, there was a moral panic over U.S. history and civics textbooks labeled communist propaganda because they discussed poverty and economic inequality. These sorts of issues were revived forcefully with the Second Red Scare and McCarthyism of the 1950s, and the focus on racial issues in textbooks reached its highest point of the 20th century following the campaign of massive resistance to school desegregation throughout the 50s and 60s. By the 1970s, the reactionary script was pretty much set in stone, and what mattered was not the reality of the curricular or textbook content, but the outrage and fear of paranoid white parents. In Kanawha County, West Virginia, in 1974, white parents reacted with violent rage to false rumors about the contents of newly approved textbooks, as conservative school board members warned that the books were full of anti-Christian, anti-American, anti-white propaganda and indoctrination. But it's important to recognize that the resistance to CRT has opened up the floodgates for a cornucopia of concerns about all sorts of books authored by or for members of marginalized communities. In October, Texas legislator Matt Krause sent out a demand to all school districts to investigate a list of over 800 books in their curricula, classrooms, and libraries. Analysis showed that more than 60% of the books on that list had to do with matters related to LGBTQ topics, and about 20% touched on transgender issues or featured a trans character. PEN America has collated an index of school book bans that offers a snapshot of the trend. Their index lists 2,532 instances of books being banned in over 100 school districts in 32 states between July 2021 and June 2022. These districts represent over 5,000 schools with a combined enrollment of over 4 million students. Some of the most common themes among the banned books are those that include prominent LGBTQ characters or characters of color, address topics involving race and racism or LGBTQ issues, or have themes related to civil rights and activism. Dozens of even children's books have been banned, including biographies of Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, and Martin Luther King Jr. The descent into fascism in Nazi Germany included numerous book burnings. The line between the Republican Party today and fascism, if it exists, is increasingly difficult to identify, as we can see from this picture side by side. This is from Tennessee, led by a Republican preacher. There were book burnings this year. And just as in Nazi Germany, today's fascistic anti-democratic movement is fueled by an alliance between an authoritarian white supremacist political party and conservative elites who see public organizing and liberal democracy as threats to their wealth and power.
Some of you might be wondering, why target critical race theory and why now? Well, it's important to note that we are facing attacks on multiracial democracy, public education, and racial and social justice because we have been winning in the court of public opinion and on the streets to demand a more just society. From the Manhattan Institute to the Heritage Foundation, from Fox News to the State Policy Network, the architects of right-wing infrastructure realized how they were facing a serious dilemma that became even more apparent after the 2020 elections, when Democrats won back control of the Senate following an incredible intersectional activation that resulted in an upset win in Georgia. As a result, one nagging challenge that right-wing operatives with the school privatization agenda had was to figure out how to get white parents to disinvest in their public schools, a formidable challenge because of the way that white supremacy operates. Because of white flight and the exclusionary and state-supported development, policing, and protection of white neighborhoods, suburban parents have been generally happy and satisfied with their public schools and public school teachers. That's why a fear-mongering campaign centered on race was so essential to turning around both the racial reckoning momentum among suburban white voters and their support for public schools. Enter the disinformation campaign against critical race theory. This hit job had to be about race, it had to have a strong emotional appeal, and it had to invoke fear with lies about the real state of things to make inroads among white suburban parents who were moved during the summer of racial reckoning to demand racial justice. At AAPF, we have been saying all along that a defensive message like critical race theory is not taught in public schools is not only ineffective, it's counterproductive. It unintentionally endorses anti-CRT legislation by treating critical race theory and systemic injustices as things that don't belong in public schools. And once we accept that premise, it's just a game of what falls inside or outside of the boundaries of CRT. This allows for distancing and disavowals to take center stage instead of affirming the importance of these essential classroom conversations. At some point, we must stand up for the importance of teaching about systemic racism and related forms of structural subordination by using the most powerful anti-racist tool that we have in our toolbox, and that is critical race theory. And so we really want to emphasize that even though the challenges ahead of us may appear stark, there has been considerable resistance. And we are thankful, for example, for the lawsuits filed against Oklahoma, New Hampshire, and Florida's backlash laws by the ACLU, LDF, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, NEA, and the AFT. Students and youth are organizing, and the groups sponsoring this event are hard at work on many initiatives. You can join AAPF tomorrow at 7 Eastern for our virtual event, Books Unbanned, From Freedom Writers to Freedom Readers, a cross-country call to action. You can find the link for free registration in the chat. So we thank you all for your attention, for helping us to fight back against these anti-CRT, anti-truth movements fueling book bans across the country.